On its surface, Halo Combat Evolved is an incredibly simple story. The battle of humanity versus a superior alien force, and a desperate struggle to stop a weapon that can wipe out all life in the galaxy. Its characters are blank slates, oftentimes clearly inspired by the action film archetypes that influenced its narrative. But upon its release, Halo had a bigger story to tell, one involving long struggles between complicated alien races and a threat to the galaxy as old as time itself. Since its beginning in 2001, the Halo mythos has grown into something massive, the gaps in its story filled out with a wide range of multimedia. But for over 20 years, the franchise has struggled to make the jump to live action, most prominently the long-running production hell of its feature film that never quite made it to big screens. So what happened with the Halo movie? How does it differ from the other pieces of Halo multimedia? And how has its legacy affected the franchise to this day? It only took 6 months for Hollywood to start calling Bungie. With the goal of creating the first truly great video game movie, studios had begun to catch Halo fever in 2001. It wasn't until the lead up to Halo 2, however, that things started to get more serious. While its original negotiations involved a pure handing over of the rights, similar to many licensing deals for books, the mainstream coverage of Halo 2's release as a massive cultural event and its eventual crowning as the highest-grossing piece of media released ever made it clear that Microsoft and Bungie now held the keys to something huge. After meeting with former Columbia Pictures head Peter Schessel, a much more favorable idea arose. Bungie could hire a writer to pen something they like, and offer it to studios as a turnkey production. No studio meddling, no script they hated, and most importantly, no opportunity for someone else to mess up their vision. This was a unique approach, unlike anything seen in a deal of this kind, and placed much of the risk in the hands of whatever studio decided to buy in. For the rights and their script, Microsoft was asking for $15 million, 15% of the box office, and direct oversight over production. This would immediately return their measly $1 million investment in the script, and basically ensure that, regardless of how the film performed, Microsoft couldn't lose. To put things in perspective, the first 4 Harry Potter films, which sold a few years prior and were known for the unprecedented control given to the original author, only sold for $1 million. Schessel would provide Bungie with a list of potential writers for the Halo screenplay, and when writer and cinematics director Joe Staten saw the name Alex Garland, someone he and composer Marty McDonald had discussed being a good fit after viewing 28 Days Later, the choice seemed clear. It's worth pointing out that this was very early in Garland's career, long before his directorial work on Ex Machina and Annihilation, when he was a sort of punk rock English novelist on the cusp of becoming a strong voice in thoughtful science fiction films and Carl Urban's Dread. In the years since, a script from Garland for the Halo movie has surfaced, and while, like with the BioShock script, it's hard to say with 100% certainty that it's real, its publishing on a wide range of websites, including Halopedia, gives me confidence that it's at least somewhat legit, even if it feels very first draft. To vet it even further, Garland's scripts before this don't feature an odd capitalization of proper nouns found in this version of Halo, but his scripts after this, starting with Dread, do, likely due to a software change after Sunshine. That, coupled with the same long stretches of scene descriptions and a deliberate guiding hand in the action that all of his scripts feature, makes me fairly confident that, if this isn't real, it's an incredibly good fake. It's also a fairly to-the-point adaptation of the first Halo game, featuring characters from the Flood novelization by Eric Nylund, like Major Silva. As a result, it feels fairly plain, and lacks strong characterization for anyone other than 343 Guilty Spark and Cortana, which says a lot considering neither are really human. A package containing Garland's script and a list of Microsoft's terms would be delivered directly to prospective studios by a Mjolnir armored courier in June of 2005. Despite the theatrics, studios like Paramount and Warner Brothers would pass immediately. It was obvious that Microsoft held too much leverage in the deal. But they also didn't quite understand that Hollywood wasn't as transparent as the games and software industry. Studios talk, and when Universal called Fox, they teamed up to dial back Microsoft's power and instead create a deal that was equally risky and beneficial to all parties. In August of 2005, the ink dried on a deal between Microsoft, Universal, and Fox, with Universal handling distribution in the US and Fox internationally, with the two studios co-funding the project directly. Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson was the first name that came up in rumors and talks between Bungie and the studios. However, when that ballooned an already rapidly growing potential budget, it became clear that a smaller director was a safer bet. Jackson, however, would remain an executive producer, providing access to Weta Workshops, his renowned special effects house in New Zealand. Directorial duties would instead land in the hands of Guillermo del Toro, fresh off the back of the first Hellboy movie and in the midst of production of the seminal Pan's Labyrinth. During del Toro's tenure, Garland's script would begin getting significant rewrites by a relatively unknown author and aspiring screenwriter, D.B. Wise, who was about 6 years out from penning a pilot for Game of Thrones. While this draft has never surfaced, the rumors frankly don't sound great. In 2020, during a reunion and speedrun developer reaction, Paul Russell mentions an anecdote between Joe Staten and del Toro, likely referencing recent changes in the first draft of Wise's script.
Why does this remind me of what Joe was saying about the Guillermo del Toro version of the script? Yeah, it had Master Chief had a twin brother, and they had the twin brother sided with the Flood. He's punching Joe in the arm, and he's like, "And they're brothers, and they're going to fight at the end." Anyway.
While this is someone not involved in the talks, remembering a nearly 20-year-old secondhand anecdote, it shows a production that doesn't really understand what Halo is, trying to adapt it. It was around this time in early 2006 that Bungie was deep in development of the third entry in the series, and starting preliminary negotiations on becoming an independent company. After the release of Halo 2, they had become the Halo Studio, forced to share their profits with Microsoft and unable to develop new original projects that they owned. It was clear that things would have to change, and that Halo 3 had to be a return of the king of sorts, a definitive ending for their own ring-based series. Their negotiated contract with Microsoft was intentionally very simple. In order to be independent, they were required to make 3 games. The already in development Halo 3, a version of Halo 4 despite their conclusive intentions for the former, and a third game under the working title of Halo Chronicles. Chronicles was intended to be a collaboration between Bungie and Peter Jackson's new game company, Wingnut Interactive. However, this wasn't a game about the Halo ring, the Spartans, or even Master Chief. This was intended as something different for the Halo universe, following a simple Marine who gradually over time becomes augmented with Covenant technology and discovers he's a member of an ancient race of Prometheans. The game would end in space, where the player would fire themselves as a missile into Covenant ships. Staten and Jackson worked on the story of Chronicles directly, while Bungie began preliminary prototypes on the gameplay, lowering the camera and stripping back much of what made Master Chief feel like the super soldier he was. As a result, a large portion of early 2006 involves Joseph Staten working alongside Weta and Peter Jackson to develop both Chronicles and the film in New Zealand. When del Toro would eventually depart from the project in mid-June to start work on the second Hellboy movie, Jackson would propose a new name to take over, a relatively unknown short film director and special effects artist named Neill Blomkamp. Blomkamp had been in the midst of shopping around his first film, a feature adaptation of his short Alive in Joburg, when the call came from Peter Jackson. Despite being, as he put it, genetically created to direct Halo, Blomkamp's goal as a director was to work on his own projects outside of bigger franchises. But he decided to not turn down the opportunity to see inside Weta and hear Jackson out.
I landed, and then within 6 minutes, I couldn't even remember the notion of doing Alive in Joburg. It was just like, Jesus, I need to work on this.
Within the next few weeks, Blomkamp would relocate his family to New Zealand and begin his tenure on the project. At this time in production, Garland's script is all but missing. In interviews with Blomkamp after the fact, he mentions that he never read the original script commissioned by Microsoft, pointing out that things at the time were much closer to what was seen in the Eric Nylund novel The Fall of Reach. The film was much more focused on a young boy named John's journey into becoming Master Chief, and his relationship with his surrogate mother, Catherine Halsey. It's unclear when exactly this switch took place, or what screenwriter was even responsible, though other aspects of pre-production were well underway, as developers visiting Weta had already driven and crashed completed Warthogs. However, not having an ironed-out script was beginning to make the studios nervous, and tensions between them and Microsoft began to grow. What was also making the studios nervous was Blomkamp himself, who had just turned 26 years old and had never worked on a feature film. His vision of a post-cyberpunk aesthetic, dominated by blurry video screens and radio chatter, didn't live up to their view of what a summer blockbuster was. He knew Halo, appreciated not only what the games were, but what had inspired them, and had a specific vision of how to adapt that to film. And before everything collapsed, he'd have the opportunity to prove it by directing test footage. The team at Bungie would be impressed with what they saw, but Microsoft, similar to the studios, felt it was an unconventional approach. Despite the quality of props, aesthetically it felt a lot closer to a war documentary than something people would watch over buckets of popcorn. To sum everything up, in October of 2006, Microsoft was unhappy with Blomkamp, Blomkamp was unhappy with how he was being treated by the studios, and the studios were unhappy that they were a year and almost $20 million in on production and had very little to show for it. And still, with no ironed-out script, something had to give. When payment from the studios to Jackson and Microsoft came up that month, Universal moved to renegotiate the terms of their deal, wanting to increase their potential profits and return on investment by cutting payouts for the producers. After discussions broke down, however, Jackson and his team would walk, and the Halo movie would be shelved. Edited portions of Blomkamp's test footage would be recut into a promo for the soon-to-be-released Halo 3 as Halo Landfall, a documentary/found footage style series of shorts following a handful of ODST and Marines assisting with the recovery of Master Chief at the beginning of the game. To see live-action props and vehicles of this quality being filmed in this way is impressive, and provides a look into just how strong of a vision Blomkamp had that early on. Being here in long-forgotten shorts feels more bittersweet than anything, as had the film been finished, the final product would have, at the very least, been one of the most visually striking video game adaptations of its time. With the relationship between Microsoft and Jackson broken down, production on Halo Chronicles would also be canceled. When Bungie were looking to replace the project, they combined ideas for a Halo 3 DLC with the more stripped-back feel of Chronicles, creating Halo 3 ODST, a smaller-scale take on the fight between the humans and the Covenant. Similarly, their Halo 4 project would instead develop into Halo Reach. Fulfilling their contract with Microsoft, Bungie would finally become independent in October of 2007, almost exactly a year after the film was canceled. On the other side, Jackson's team would begin production on Blomkamp's first feature, District 9, an adaptation of his Alive in Joburg short using modified props, sets, and vehicles from the Halo production. District 9 would launch Blomkamp's career into a similar place as Alex Garland, both of which becoming respective directors of thoughtful pieces of science fiction told on a smaller scale. Guillermo del Toro and Peter Jackson, who remained in contact after parting ways, would reunite on the then only 2 Hobbit films, occupying similar roles as they had on Halo, with Jackson as producer and del Toro as director. This collaboration would end in a similar way, however, with the latter leaving the project after a series of financial hardships from one of MGM's many potential bankruptcies. On the Halo side, things would become relatively dormant for almost 2 years. However, in 2008, an anonymous source close to the project leaked that Stuart Beattie of the first Pirates of the Caribbean fame had taken it upon himself during the writer's strike to pen a spec script for his own Halo prequel film, once again loosely based on the fall of Reach. Its intention was to be much more character-driven, focusing on John's journey through the Spartan program side by side with the first contact on Harvest, going as far as to not show a single member of the Covenant until the second half. It was designed specifically as a crowd pleaser, filling gaps in the Halo lore for hardcore fans and providing a safe entry point for newcomers. Alongside his script, Beattie would also provide concept art for key moments to potential studios by Spider-Man 3 artist Khosrow Farahani, who, around this same time, was also working on another eventually canceled video game movie, BioShock. This wasn't without interest, however, and rumors began to persist that Steven Spielberg, who shared representation with Beattie at Creative Artists Agency, was, quote, blown away by the direction Beattie had taken. Negotiations, however, would go quiet for several years, and during that time, the newly created 343 Studios would produce Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn, a title that's a little too hard to pronounce, in October of 2012. This would be the first long-form live-action production Halo would receive, and was intended as a sort of on-ramp to the upcoming Halo 4 to be released on the franchise's news hub Halo Waypoint and Machinima.com. This was unlike any other production for Halo so far, except maybe Landfall, as it wasn't intended as a straight adaptation of a game or targeting a big screen release. As a result, its lineup of cast and crew are much less prominent names, being directed by Stuart and starring Anna Popplewell from Chronicles of Narnia, Ayelet Zurer, who played Laura L. in Man of Steel, and Daniel Cudmore of Colossus fame as Master Chief. Despite that low budget and, as Hindler put it, no rules approach that came with made-for-web content, the series would also reuse some props from the Peter Jackson production, most prominently the Warthog. In a lot of ways, Forward Unto Dawn is fairly close to what I picture Beattie's script being, while also moving into the new era of Halo and 343. Being focused on a UNSC training academy before the Human Covenant War, we get a meaningful glimpse into what it felt like to be just a human as the war with the insurrectionists ended, First Contact happened, and the Spartans were introduced. Combat is quite literally evolving underneath the main character's feet, and similar to Beattie's script, the Covenant and Master Chief are largely missing in its first half, making both of them feel intimidating and weird when the action starts. Similar to Blomkamp's work, there's also a war documentary feeling, going as far to include talking heads and sound bites to give characters even more room to shine. It probably most reminds me of ensemble Netflix documentaries like Formula One's Drive to Survive, with a sort of Ender's Game or Starship Troopers twist, using the childish war games of the Academy to contrast with how ineffectual humanity is when they actually have to fight the Covenant. It's by no means a masterpiece, or even a satisfactory consolation prize after waiting so long for something live action. And I would understand if many Halo fans would be disappointed with how reserved it is with its toys. But for early streaming exclusive content like this, it's pretty impressive. Shortly after its release, and working largely off the production's success, Microsoft would officially announce a collaboration with Steven Spielberg on a Halo TV series at their Xbox One reveal in 2013. While no streaming service is stated, it's very much a part of Microsoft posing the new console as the singular multimedia entertainment system and it being a part of a new streaming pillar to the Xbox brand. Despite this, it would take until the following year for anything tangible to appear. In May of 2014, Variety would report that Xbox and Spielberg's Amblin Television were closing in on a deal with Showtime, featuring a comprehensive show bible developed by Stuart Beattie. This would be the last time Beattie would be mentioned in anything relating to the Halo project, despite it being very likely that he was responsible for the initial negotiations. Just a few days later, head of 343 Studios Bonnie Ross would write in a blog post that the series would air in fall of 2015, around the release of Halo 5 Guardians. This did not happen, but in August of 2015, Showtime president David Nevins would confirm to IGN that the show was still in production. In October, limited editions of Halo 5 would include an animated adaptation of Eric Nylund's The Fall of Reach. Despite the similarities to both the Jackson production and the spec script from Beattie, no one who worked on that project would be involved. The TV series would once again go quiet for nearly 3 years, until 2018, when Showtime would officially announce the Halo series, expected to release in early 2019, with the Rise of the Planet of the Apes director Rupert Wyatt as director and Kyle Killen as showrunner. Due to scheduling conflicts, Wyatt would drop out of the project early on and be replaced by Otto Bathurst, most known for 2018's Robin Hood and Black Mirror's first episode National Anthem. Shortly before actual production was to begin, showrunner Kyle Killen would depart the project due to feeling unable to complete the entirety of his duties, likely due to the abundance of stakeholders now involved in the project. Despite that, production would finally get underway in late 2019, shooting in Budapest with Stephen Kane taking Killen's place. When productions would pick back up after initial COVID lockdowns, Kane would also announce that he was leaving the project after Season 1, and David Weiner would be heading up production in the future. Finally, nearly 20 years after initial negotiations for a Halo live-action film would begin, Halo the TV series would release on CBS's streaming service Paramount+. Initial reactions were relatively mixed, and it's kind of obvious that the production was a mess and was forced to be a lot of things for a lot of different people. In the span of 9 episodes, it's trying to loosely adapt The Fall of Reach, set up events for the first Halo game, resolve the pre-Covenant conflict with insurrectionists, be accessible to newcomers, and provide something that satisfies die-hard fans. all while making a show that's actually fun to watch. And while it's certainly not the best show on TV, it's a commendable effort that feels tonally and visually similar to shows like The Expanse and the Battlestar Galactica reboot, even if it's never as consistently competent as those shows. It does, however, have a surprisingly likable lead cast, and enough interesting questions and changes from the source material to make it enjoyable beyond just for research. My biggest complaint beyond the helmetless chief and rubbery-feeling Covenant is its refusal to play with all of its Halo toys. ODST are nowhere to be seen, and grunts are mostly blink-and-you-miss-it style cameos. But seeing the meticulous detail on UNSC vehicles and equipment is enough to get me interested. There's value in seeing scenes from the novels recreated here, but enough of a feeling of not knowing exactly what's going to happen next to make it enjoyable. That being said, I certainly understand why people wouldn't be impressed with it. Some of its characterizations feel toned down, Cortana and Lord Hood in particular, and none of the action captures that frantic war film feeling that we've come to expect from Halo live action. Like with Forward Unto Dawn, it feels like a shame that after so long, a less than definitive adaptation is all we get, my own personal enjoyment aside. As the Halo show moves into its second season, it's hard to not think about where this all came from, and reflect on whether or not this was the best choice for the franchise. On one hand, there's much more room for improvement. With new showrunners and the rise of other adaptations like HBO's The Last of Us, there's real room for Halo to be competitive with the rest of prestige TV. Many shows take multiple seasons to get truly great. But on the other, it's hard to not think about what could have been. Seeing Jackson, Del Toro, Garland, or Blomkamp working in their prime to create Halo on the big screen feels like a seminal theatrical moment that we'll never see. A nostalgic reminder of that time before Bungie went independent, when Halo was king. When it all felt a little more simple, despite its push into a wide range of medians. And if those glimpses of Landfall are anything to go off of, likely a high-budget look into what game adaptations could be.